Asics is stride running versus cadence running. From a biomechanical standpoint, it's a really interesting problem to solve for. And from a product engineering standpoint, it's also a really interesting thing to design around and create product against. But from a product marketing standpoint, it's convoluted at best. It's a hard concept to explain to even more advanced runners who really understand this stuff, let alone an average runner who just wants a pair of shoes to go race in. So before we jump in, we need to define what an average consumer is. Now, typically in product design terms, this can be called a bunch of things. You could have personas or use cases written around this, but your average consumer is sort of your base case. They have a problem or a need they need to solve, therefore they want this product. And they have two requirements. How much does it cost? How quickly can I get it? Now, things like brand loyalty and brand experience don't necessarily always come into consideration for these average consumers. They literally want to solve their problem as quickly and cheaply as possible. So if we extend that to an average runner, this is a runner who is not you or me. They're not watching YouTube videos about shoes and shoe tech. This is someone who just, trains weekly and maybe they're going to go run their first marathon, so they need a pair of shoes for that in this case. This is someone who isn't on social media looking at running, or maybe they follow one or two runners, probably in their local friend group. At best, they're going to go to runnersworld.com and maybe look at what are the top shoes, or if they need a marathon race, or what does Runner's World recommend. But honestly, they're probably not even going to do that. They're going to go back to things like their brand recognition of someone like the brand that they're training in. And they're going to go, well, these shoes work for me in training, therefore I'm going to just try out their marathon racer. They must have one. Everyone does. So this does bring in something called brand impressions. Now, this is not brand impressions from a marketing standpoint when you run an ad in the Super Bowl and how many impressions do you get for how many dollars you spend on that. No, this is what is the impression the user has of the brand. So this has a mix of brand recall. Do they remember the brand? Brand awareness. Do they know the brand exists? And then their overall experience with the brand. And I think this really applies in running because everyone's run in some shoes, probably multiple shoes, and they probably have good experience with some and bad with others. Or maybe their local sort of peer group likes a certain shoe, and that's the one that they're going to favor versus the one that they think is not a serious runner's shoe because it's sold at department stores. So, they're going to run into a bunch of things. So your brand impression is going to be very important here. And that's ultimately what you're trying to communicate or continue or grow with your average runners. Because again, they're just sort of sticking to what they know. They're not you or I, where they're trying to really getting in the weeds of things, really spending a lot of time thinking through this stuff, trying this stuff out, talking about this stuff, researching this stuff, and really making their own opinions on what they think is good and bad. These are just runners who, they just want to go out and run. They have a pair of shoes. That's a brand that they like. They stick to that, and they just sort of go forward in that way. So when we're talking about the Asics Metaspeed series, that is a marathon racing shoe. And then theoretically, that means it's a more advanced shoe. But look at any marathon you've done, and frankly, look at any race you've done. I guarantee 80%, probably more of the runners in that race are just average runners. They're still wearing super shoes. They bought those super shoes. They figured out which ones they wanted somehow. But just because the Metaspeed series is a more advanced shoe doesn't make it immune to being able to effectively communicate what it's trying to solve for you as an average consumer, or in this case, average runner. So let's go through a couple scenarios that this average runner would run into when they're trying to buy a pair of new marathon racing shoes. So the first scenario would be, this is the runner who's been training in a pair of Asics trainers, and they love those trainers. They've worked really well for them. They're really happy with them, and therefore they have a very favorable brand impression of Asics. So when they want to go do a race, say a marathon, they're going to go back to Asics and buy whatever marathon shoe Asics has. Now, this runner could go online and go to asics.com/running and, filter for their racing shoes or their marathon shoes. And they're going to see that there's a Metaspeed, and then they're going to see, but wait, there's a Metaspeed Sky Plus and a Metaspeed Edge Plus, and in some markets, there's a Metaspeed Sky. What is that? So now there's a ton of different products that are essentially all the same to this runner. And two of them, the Sky Plus and the Edge Plus, look identical depending on what colorway you're looking at. There is one colorway that is slightly different, but you would never know that unless you really look at it. So they're going to go there. They're going to see like, oh, wow, there's so many choices here. Why is this so complicated? Either they're going to just be like, well, this is more involved than I want. I'm just going to go ask my friend which one they race in, and I'm going to go buy that shoe. So they leave, which is a bad thing for Asics. Second thing is they could click into one of those shoes and, sort of read the marketing copy. Maybe they watch the video that sort of tries to explain, do you take longer steps or more steps, and tries to put them in the right model. But again, that's maybe more involved than they want, or maybe it's just they're going to at best make a guess on one because they don't really know, and those videos aren't really that great to explain it, nor is the marketing copy. So either they just, again, leave and go ask their friend or, someone they trust, a coach or something, which shoe they should buy, or they pick one, they buy it, they get it, they run in it, they don't like it, and now they think, well, I got the wrong one, obviously. I should have got the other one. But this shoe was $250. I'm not going to go buy the other one. I'm just going to make this work. So now their brand impression of Asics is far less because it was a hard process to get that product. And then the product didn't deliver. It wasn't as good as the trainer that they loved. Now that's kind of a best case scenario. The even worse scenario here, like I said, they just click off the page, they're gone, they go to Nike and they buy a Vaporfly, or they ask their coach and the coach tells them to buy whatever they want, whatever they recommend. So none of those end in, converting the user to buying another Asics shoe. Yes, there is a scenario here where they read about it, they educate themselves, they pick the right one, and they love it. But honestly, that's an edge case. That's the least likely option given all the other things that could happen in this first scenario. Second scenario is very similar. Maybe this runner bought their Asics trainers at the local running store. Even this one's a little bit more of a reach because running stores are really only in major cities, major markets, globally, not just the US. So not everyone has access to this. Most people have access to sort of a general sporting goods store, which probably isn't going to stock something like a Asics Metaspeed. At best, they're going to have a Vaporfly, but that may be it. They probably don't even have that. But in this scenario, they go back to their local running store where they bought their pair of Asics trainers. They walk in, they ask the salesperson, I love these Asics trainers I bought here. What do you recommend for an Asics marathon racing? Because I'm going to run my first marathon. So now the salesperson needs to explain the whole stride versus cadence running and try to educate the average runner, which is a big ask of the salesperson because they've got a ton of other things they need to do and sell. But additionally, to the average runner, they may have thought they can just run into the store, pop in, get the pair of shoes and pop out. Now this is going to be like a 20-minute thing where now they have to get on a treadmill and they have to like try both shoes on and jog in the store. They weren't really ready to do any of that stuff. They didn't really prepare to do that. So either they're just going to walk in, hear that and be like, well, no, I don't really have time for this. And they're going to leave the store, go ask a friend or a coach, which one should I buy? They're going to go buy that. And it's probably not going to be the Asics Metaspeed. Or they're going to stick with it. They're going to go through the whole sales thing. They're going to spend the 20 minutes. They're going to get one of them. They're going to go run in it, but they're not going to love it. And they're going to be like, well, obviously, like I didn't perform well enough, or the salesperson didn't understand me well enough. So I'm in the wrong shoe. I should have got the other shoe. But again, this was $250. I'm not going to buy the other shoe. So again, not a favorable ending. And yes, there is the scenario where they could walk into the store, salesperson's great, they get the right shoe, they go, run in it, they love it. But again, that's the edge case. That's the least likely option here. And a third option, kind of a 2.5 option, say they are in the store, they say, well, tell me about the Asics marathon racers. So now the salesperson goes into, oh, are you this type of runner or that type of runner? They have these two shoes. And they're like, well, no, like that's too involved. What's the most popular shoe that people race marathons in the store? The salesperson's going to point to whatever that shoe is in the store. Chances are it's probably not a Metaspeed. It's probably a Vaporfly or something else. And, now, again, that runner who had every intention and a good brand impression of Asics now has no brand impression because now it's just too convoluted. And now they bought another brand and they've gone off and they've they're going to run in that. They're going to have probably a fairly decent race in that shoe. And when they go for their next trainer, they're probably just going to buy that brand because they're sticking with what they know. And that's what an average runner or consumer will typically do. If we look at Nike here, and Nike really are the masters at marketing. It's what they built the brand on, for better or for worse, depending on how you feel about Nike. But they are the masters of telling a story and making it very convincing as to why this product's better than that. Or when they have a product, they're very good at designing and engineering their products where you can see a very clear difference. And if you look at their current racing shoes, the Vaporfly versus the Alphafly, if an average runner looks at those two shoes, they can very clearly see that there's a difference between those two shoes. They may not understand what it is, but the average consumer can look at an Alphafly and be like, well, that shoe has those air pods. I've run in a pair of, I've owned a pair of Nike Air Maxes. I know what Nike Air feels like. That shoe is going to be very cushy and soft. That's exactly what I need for my race. It looks really thick. I'm going to get that for my marathon because that looks like the shoe I need. Where they can look at a Vaporfly and be like, well, that shoe looks very sort of stripped down and very advanced. Maybe that's not the shoe for me, but this other one looks big and soft. That's probably the one for me. There's a very clear product distinction between the two. From a product engineering standpoint, Nike has spent a lot of times, particularly in the Alphafly, of engineering a marquee sort of technology in that you can really understand as any sort of consumer. It doesn't have to be a really educated or advanced consumer. Anyone can look at that and understand Nike Air is going to be soft, versus they can look at the shoe without Nike Air and know that that's probably going to feel firmer or different than the shoe with Nike Air. Even though the AirPod isn't necessarily the same as Nike Air, there's a clear distinction. The other thing I'll say from a product engineering standpoint, I'm sure Nike and frankly all the other running shoe brands are factoring in the biomechanics of stride versus cadence running, but they're also factoring a bunch of other stuff. And if you look at the Vaporfly versus the Alphafly, the Vaporfly is really Nike's sort of all-around racer. It's the racer that you can do 1 mile up to a marathon. And when you're doing shorter, harder, faster running, you're often going to extend your stride and increase your cadence because you're going closer to a threshold pace and you're kind of all out. So both of those are going to go. Whereas with a marathon, it's a much more steady type of running for most people. So you're probably going to do one or the other. So to have shoes distinguished only by biomechanics is also a little bit problematic, which is why you don't see any other brand really doing that. They've factored it in, but they've also factored in a bunch of other things that are attributes of the shoe, of their technology, of whatever they're trying to market, and it's a much more clear story to tell. So what can Asics do here? Well, I think they're kind of doing it, and I think the solution here ultimately is the Metaspeed Edge goes away. And I think Asics is actually in the process of doing this. Now, if you look at the sales numbers of the Metaspeed series, I guarantee you the Sky outsells the Edge 2 to 1, probably more. Mostly because whenever you see the Metaspeed featured, the Sky, Sky Plus, Sky 2, Sky 3, whatever the Sky model is always the one that's front and center. And you sometimes don't even see that there's an Edge, or you'll see the Sky really big and then you'll see over in the corner, it's like, oh, by the way, there's this other shoe, this other model called the Edge. They always feature the Sky first and foremost, which is the one that has the recognition. Because I think Asics understands that for their technology, for their foam, for their carbon fiber plate, for everything that they have in their technology stack, the Sky Plus is really the best example and the best use of all those technologies to make the best Asics marathon racing shoe. Where the Edge, again, good idea, but it's a little bit convoluted. And I think you've already seen them sort of evolving the Edge in other directions. I've talked about on this channel how I think the Magic Speed 3 is a better Edge than the Edge has ever been in other shoes. The Magic Speed 3 looks very different from the Metaspeed Sky Plus. It's also got a different name. It's an easier story to tell. It has different technologies. I think the technologies in the Magic Speed 3 work better for that sort of Vaporfly-like plate configuration. I've got a video about that. I've talked about that in other videos. But that is Asics distinguishing those two types of running shoes in different lines. We also have another shoe from Asics called the S4, which is a Japan-only shoe right now, which could see global release. I've seen rumors of that recently. The S4 is literally the original Metaspeed Edge with FF Turbo above the plate and then flight foam below it with a slightly wider platform. But it's the same Edge plate configuration in a shoe that's really designed for a slower runner, a 4-hour marathon or under. So it's got a very distinct product story tied to it that's not just about, are you a stride runner or cadence runner? Even though it's doing more of the cadence running thing, it's got a bigger story around it. So it's a clearer picture to really understand the difference in that shoe. And if you look at it next to the Sky Plus, there is a bit of a difference because it's marketed a little different. The coloring's a little different. The logos on the shoe are a little different. There is something that's different about these two shoes, and you can see that. It's not as clear as, say, Nike with the Alphafly and the Vaporfly, but Asics doesn't really have a marquee technology like an AirPod like Nike does. Yeah, they have gel, but they don't use gel in the Metaspeed series. So Asics is a very innovative company. They make very good shoes, especially in the past couple years. And again, I think they're a company that's not afraid to try things. And I think trying the stride versus cadence running thing was a good move for Asics. But now I feel like they're probably stepping it back, or they're going to roll it into a broader sort of product marketing story around their racing shoes. My previous video on this channel, which I'll put a link in the description, was talking about how maybe the Super Blast becomes a Metaspeed Blast, and now they'll have a plated Metaspeed Sky and a non-plated racing shoe. A plated versus non-plated shoe is again a much easier story to tell about product differences than stride running versus cadence running. So again, I feel like Asics is working on this stuff. I think over the next year or two, we'll see wherever they resolve this. And I think, again, we'll have very good products from Asics. They'll just be much more clearly marketed in much more clear terms. Thank you for making it to the end of the video. If you like this type of content, consider subscribing because you see more of it pop up in your feed. If not, drop a like on this video because it helps this channel continue to grow, which I'm always appreciative of. And with that, I'll catch you in the next one.